Piper Dawson clutched her boarding pass as she hurried through the bustling airport, her heart racing. She was late again. The universe had a way of making her life harder than it needed to be, and today was no exception. She barely glanced at the gate number before rushing onto the plane, exhaling in relief as she found her seat, 4A. Wait, 4A? Her brows furrowed as she sank into the plush leather seat, far too luxurious to be economy. A flight attendant passed by, offering a flute of champagne, and Piper blinked. Was this? Miss, may I take your coat? The impeccably dressed flight attendant asked with a polite smile. Piper hesitated. Sure. She handed over her coat, her brain spinning. Had she somehow been upgraded? There was no way she could afford first class not on her paycheck. But before she could investigate further, a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. You're in my seat. She turned and her breath caught. The man standing beside her was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that screamed wealth. His sharp blue eyes locked onto her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't just good-looking, he was devastatingly handsome, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in a magazine ad for luxury watches. Piper swallowed. I think there's been a mistake. He arched a brow as he glanced at his boarding pass. 4A. Piper fumbled for hers, unfolding the crumpled paper. Her stomach dropped. Oh. I am supposed to be in 24A. The flight attendant returned, her face slightly tense. Is there a problem, Mr. Prescott? Mr. Prescott. Even his name sounded expensive. He exhaled, then surprised her by turning to the flight attendant. Just let her stay. Piper's eyes widened. What? No, I can move. I insist. His voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. The flight attendant hesitated before nodding. Of course, Mr. Prescott. Piper stared at him, confused. You don't even know me. He finally settled into the seat beside her, fastening his seatbelt. Consider it charity. Her jaw dropped. Excuse me? The corner of his mouth twitched ever so slightly, as if he found her reaction amusing. You look like you could use something good happening to you. Piper bristled, but before she could retort, the plane began taxiing. She was stuck next to this enigmatic, infuriating, ridiculously attractive man for the next 6 hours. Great. An hour into the flight, Piper had stopped glaring at her seatmate and started wondering who, exactly, he was. She stole glances at him as he worked on his laptop, his fingers flying over the keyboard with effortless precision. Everything about him was crisp, controlled. Finally, curiosity won. So, Prescott. Huh? That sounds familiar. He didn't glance up. It should. She waited for more, but he offered nothing. Piper tapped her fingers on the armrest. You're not going to elaborate? He sighed, shutting his laptop. Yale Prescott. Clicked. Prescott Enterprises. The multi-million-dollar investment firm. Wait, you're that Prescott? He nodded. Wow. She let out a breath. So, what? You just go around letting random people steal your seat? His lips twitched again. No, you're the first. Something about the way he said it made her stomach flutter. The turbulence jolted her awake. Piper's eyes flew open as the cabin lights flickered. The seatbelt sign glowed, and the plane rocked again. She gripped the armrests, her pulse racing. Breathe. Yale's voice came, low and steady. She turned to him, her fingers digging into the seat. I hate flying. His gaze softened. You'll be fine. Another jolt. Piper's breath hitched. Without thinking, she grabbed his hand. Yale stiffened, but after a second, his fingers curled around hers, warm and steady. Just keep talking, she whispered. He studied her for a moment before speaking. Where are you headed? San Francisco. Job interview. What kind of job? Marketing, she said, focusing on his voice. It's a long shot, but I need a fresh start. He nodded. New beginnings aren't always easy, but they're worth it. His words carried a weight she didn't quite understand. When the turbulence passed, Piper realized she was still holding his hand. She pulled away quickly, cheeks burning. Sorry. He didn't say anything, but something shifted in his expression. When the plane finally landed, Piper gathered her things, expecting Yale to disappear into the sea of wealthy businessmen the moment they disembarked. But as she stepped off the plane, he was there. Waiting. She blinked. You don't have to. Let me give you a ride. She hesitated. I don't think I belong in whatever car you drive. Yale gave her a long look. You sat in my seat. You might as well sit in my car. Piper laughed despite herself. That's your logic? He nodded. Against her better judgment, she followed him outside where a sleek black luxury sedan was waiting. Of course, as the driver opened the door for her, she turned to Yale. Why are you being nice to me? He studied her for a moment before saying, I don't know yet. Something about the way he said it made her breath catch. And as the car pulled away, Piper couldn't shake the feeling that somehow her life had just changed forever. The city lights blurred past as the car glided smoothly through the streets. Piper sat stiffly in the plush leather seat, her hands clasped in her lap. She had no idea why she'd agreed to this. Accepting a ride from a man like Yale Prescott was the kind of decision that led to trouble, the kind she had no business inviting into her already chaotic life. And yet, here she was. Yale sat beside her, his posture relaxed, his gaze on the passing skyline. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken thoughts. Piper stole a glance at him, wondering what kind of man could command an entire empire yet willingly hand over his first-class seat to a stranger. Where to? He asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. She hesitated. I booked a hotel near downtown. A flicker of something crossed his face. Which one? When she mentioned the name, his expression darkened. That's not a safe area. Piper frowned. It's what I could afford. He didn't respond immediately, but the air in the car shifted. A moment later, he spoke, his tone leaving no room for argument. You're not staying there. She turned to him, her brows raised. Excuse me. It's a terrible location. I'll get you a different place. Piper let out a short laugh. I don't need rescuing. His gaze met hers, steady and unreadable. I didn't say you did. The car slowed to a stop at a red light. Piper exhaled, pressing her fingers to her temple. She barely knew this man. He owed her nothing, and she certainly wasn't accustomed to this kind of generosity. I appreciate the concern, she said, choosing her words carefully, but I'm not some damsel in distress. Yale studied her for a long moment before nodding. Understood. The car resumed its course, and she expected him to drop the subject. But when they arrived at her hotel, she took one look at the dimly lit entrance, the flickering neon sign, and the group of men loitering outside, and her stomach dropped. Yale didn't say a word. He simply reached for the door handle, but she stopped him. Fine, she muttered. What's your alternative? His lips pressed together as if he was trying not to say, I told you so. Instead, he simply gestured for her to get back in the car. Minutes later, they pulled up to a towering glass building in the heart of the city. Piper's jaw nearly hit the floor as she took in the grand entrance, the polished marble lobby glowing under golden chandeliers. This is not what I meant, she mumbled as she stepped inside. Yale followed, handing his keycard to the concierge without a word. She turned to him, arms crossed. I cannot afford this. You're not paying for it. Her eyes narrowed. That's not how this works. Why not? Because I don't know you. His gaze didn't waver. You knew me enough to take my seat. You knew me enough to accept my ride. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. He had a point. Finally, she sighed. I'm paying you back. He inclined his head slightly. If that makes you feel better. It did, though she doubted he'd ever take her money. Still, she wasn't the type to accept favors without repayment. The concierge handed her the key, and she hesitated. Why are you doing this? Yale's expression remained unreadable. I don't like leaving things unfinished. With that, he turned and walked away. Piper stared after him, her pulse unsteady. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she had a feeling Yale Prescott wasn't going to be easy to forget. The next morning, Piper arrived at her interview with a determination she hadn't felt in months. The night in the luxurious hotel had given her the best sleep she'd had in ages, and though she still didn't fully understand Yale's motives, she wasn't going to waste the opportunity. She stepped into the sleek office building, adjusting her blazer. The receptionist directed her to the waiting area where she sat, inhaling deeply to steady her nerves. Minutes later, the interviewer called her in. The meeting started well. Piper answered each question with confidence, highlighting her experience and ideas. But as the conversation went on, she noticed the hiring manager's polite yet distant demeanor. And then came the dreaded words. We're looking for someone with more experience in high-profile accounts. Her stomach sank. She fought to keep her face neutral. I understand, but I can assure you I'm a fast learner. I'm adaptable. I have no doubt, the interviewer said kindly. But we need someone who already has those connections. The meeting wrapped up quickly after that. Piper walked out of the office, her shoulders stiff, her pulse throbbing. She had known it was a long shot, but she had hoped just for a moment that maybe things were finally turning in her favor. Guess not. She stepped outside, the cool breeze biting against her skin. Exhaling, she pulled out her phone, preparing to search for the nearest coffee shop where she could drown her disappointment in caffeine. Before she could type, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "How did it go?" She turned, startled. Yale stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression that was far too perceptive. Her throat tightened. "How do you know where I was?" He didn't answer immediately. "I make it my business to know things." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. She forced a smile. "Didn't get it. But I'll figure something else out." His gaze didn't waver. "And if you didn't have to?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" Yale studied her for a long moment. Then, with the same nonchalance he had displayed on the plane, he said, "Come work for me." Piper's mind blanked. "What?" "I need a new head of marketing." She let out a disbelieving laugh. "You don't even know my qualifications. I know you're determined. I know you don't back down. And I know you're not afraid to challenge people. That's what I need." Her pulse pounded. This was insane. And yet something inside her whispered that this was the moment that would change everything. Piper's breath hitched as Yale's words settled between them. Work for him? The offer was so unexpected, so absurdly casual, that for a moment she thought she'd misheard him. But the way he watched her, calm and unwavering, told her he wasn't joking. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog of disbelief. "You can't just offer me a job because I happen to sit in your seat." Yale's expression didn't change. "That's not why I'm offering." She folded her arms. "Then why?" "You're sharp," he said simply. "You think fast, you don't intimidate easily, and you argue even when it's inconvenient. That's exactly the kind of person I want handling my company's marketing." Piper let out a short laugh, though it held no humor. "You've known me less than 24 hours, and from what I can tell, you make decisions based on logic, not impulse. So why are you making an exception for me?" Yale tilted his head slightly as if considering her words. "Maybe I don't see it as an exception." She exhaled, her mind spinning. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. She had spent months applying for jobs, getting rejection after rejection, and now out of nowhere a millionaire was offering her a position she wasn't even sure she was qualified for? "This is crazy," she muttered. "Most things worth doing are." His confidence was maddening. Piper searched his face for some indication that this was a test, or worse, a joke. But Yale Prescott wasn't the type to waste time on meaningless gestures. Still, she wasn't about to just blindly accept. "What's the catch?" "There's no catch." She narrowed her eyes. "That's what people say right before they reveal the fine print." Yale's gaze remained steady. "The only condition is that you do the job well. If you don't, I'll fire you." She blinked. "That's it. That's it." Piper crossed her arms, staring at him. "You're serious?" "I don't make a habit of saying things I don't mean." The weight of his words pressed down on her, and she swallowed hard. This was an opportunity she couldn't have imagined in her wildest dreams. But it also felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was solid ground beneath her. She had spent so much of her life scraping by on her own, relying only on herself. Taking this job, accepting help from someone like Yale, felt like surrendering control. And yet, something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the moment she had been waiting for. She inhaled deeply. "I'll think about it." Yale nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "Take your time." But somehow they both knew she wouldn't take long. The next morning, Piper sat on the edge of the impossibly soft hotel bed, staring at her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, her mind replaying every moment of her conversation with Yale. She had spent half the night going over the offer, listing every possible reason why it was a terrible idea. He was a stranger. The job was probably way out of her league. And what kind of man handed out career-changing opportunities to people he barely knew? But then there was the other side of the argument, the one that reminded her how badly she needed this. How much she had struggled just to get a single interview, only to be brushed aside again and again because she didn't have the right connections. And now, she had a connection. Powerful one. She exhaled sharply. Before she could second-guess herself, She tapped Yale's number and pressed call. He picked up after one ring. That was faster than I expected. Piper rolled her eyes. You knew I'd say yes. I had a feeling. She hesitated before speaking again. But I want it in writing. A real offer. No favors. No charity. She could hear the faint amusement in his voice. You'll have a contract by the end of the day. Her stomach twisted, a mixture of nerves and excitement battling for control. Then I guess I work for you now. Looks like it. Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. By the time Piper arrived at Prescott Enterprises for her first day, the weight of what she had agreed to finally hit her. The building was a towering masterpiece of glass and steel, its entrance lined with polished marble and a security team that looked like they belonged in a high-stakes action movie. She adjusted the strap of her bag, straightened her blazer, and forced herself to walk through the doors like she belonged there. She didn't. Not yet. But she would. The receptionist greeted her with a polite smile before directing her to the executive floor. As she stepped into the elevator, she forced herself to breathe. This was it. When the doors opened, she was met with sleek, modern offices and a view that stretched across the entire city. The space screamed power, quiet, effortless power. And at the center of it all was Yale. He was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, speaking with a group of executives, his presence commanding even in silence. His suit was sharp, his posture as controlled as ever, but when he turned and saw her, something flickered in his expression. He dismissed the executives with a brief nod before walking toward her. You're early. Piper lifted her chin. Figured I should make a good impression. He studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the office beside his. Your desk is in there. I'll introduce you to the team soon. She followed him inside, taking in the spacious office. The desk was sleek, the chair probably more expensive than her old apartment's rent, and the view. The view was breathtaking. This is mine, she asked, unable to hide the disbelief. You're an executive now, Yale said simply. You should have an office that reflects that. A strange warmth spread through her chest. She had spent years working in cramped spaces, fighting for scraps of opportunity. And now she had this. She turned to Yale, meeting his gaze. I won't let you regret this. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his eyes shifted. I don't make decisions I regret. Piper exhaled, forcing herself to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She had no idea what she had just stepped into, but one thing was certain: her life would never be the same again. Piper had never been more exhausted in her life. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind: long meetings, late nights, and a crash course in navigating the high-stakes world of Prescott Enterprises. She had expected challenges, but nothing could have prepared her for the relentless pace of working in Yale's orbit. He was precise, demanding, and utterly relentless. But he was also fair, and despite his intimidating presence, she had come to respect him more than she ever thought possible. And then there was the other problem. She was falling for him. She didn't know when it had started, only that it had crept up on her like a slow burn, igniting every time he looked at her with those piercing blue eyes or leaned in just a little too close during a strategy session. It was ridiculous. He was her boss. This was strictly professional. Except nothing about the way he watched her felt professional. Late one evening, she found herself alone in the office, the city skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had stayed behind to finish a project, but she wasn't alone for long. She heard footsteps before she saw him. You should be home, Yale said, his voice low as he leaned against the doorframe. She glanced up from her laptop. So should you. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I don't have anywhere else I'd rather be. Her breath caught. She forced herself to focus on the screen. I just need to wrap this up. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the room, his presence filling the space between them. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more deliberate. Piper. She swallowed. You've done enough for tonight. She knew what he was really saying. The words were casual, but the weight behind them wasn't. Reluctantly, she shut her laptop. Yale watched her for a long moment before extending a hand. Come with me. She hesitated. Where? His lips quirked slightly. Do you always ask this many questions? Yes. He didn't look surprised. Trust me. She shouldn't. Every logical part of her brain screamed that blurring these lines was dangerous. But when she placed her hand in his, logic didn't stand a chance. He led her to the elevator, and instead of heading to the lobby, he pressed the button for the rooftop. The moment they stepped out, the world seemed to expand around them. The city stretched endlessly, lights twinkling against the dark sky. A soft breeze whispered through the air, carrying the quiet hum of distant traffic. It was breathtaking. Piper turned to him. "Why are we up here?" Yale didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze locked onto hers. "I wanted to show you something," he said finally. She arched a brow. "The view." He shook his head. "The silence." She frowned slightly, but then she listened. The city was alive, always moving, always demanding. But up here, above it all, there was peace. She exhaled. "It's beautiful." Yale's eyes never left her. "It is." Her pulse quickened. He wasn't talking about the skyline. She turned away, gripping the railing. "This is dangerous." He took a step closer. "What is?" She forced a laugh. "You. This. Whatever it is that's happening between us. You think it's something?" She looked at him, then really looked at him, and she knew there was no point in pretending anymore. "You know it is." The air between them shifted. Yale reached for her, his fingers brushing against her wrist. "I've never met anyone like you, Piper." Her throat tightened. "You barely knew me when you gave me this job." "I knew enough." She shook her head. "You took a risk." "I don't take risks." She inhaled sharply. "Then what do you call this?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he cupped her face, his touch impossibly gentle. She should have pulled away. She should have reminded him of all the reasons this was a mistake. But when he kissed her, every reason disappeared. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't careful. It was deep and consuming, like he had been waiting for this moment just as long as she had. She melted into him, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt as the city pulsed around them. When they finally broke apart, her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Yale rested his forehead against hers. "Tell me this is a mistake, and I'll walk away." She closed her eyes. She couldn't. So instead, she whispered, "Don't walk away." And he didn't. Not that night. Not ever. Piper had thought she understood intensity. She had worked under pressure, chased impossible goals, and pushed herself harder than most. But nothing had prepared her for what it was like to be wanted by Yale Prescott. From the moment they had crossed that unspoken, irreversible line on the rooftop, everything changed. He didn't play games. He didn't pretend to be indifferent or hesitant. He pursued her with the same precision and focus he applied to everything else in his life. And she was powerless against it. It started with the little things, the way he would find reasons to keep her in meetings longer than necessary. How his eyes lingered on her whenever they were in the same room. How his hand would brush against hers in passing, like a silent promise. But then came the moments that left her breathless. The night he had called her into his office long after everyone else had gone home, claiming he needed her opinion on a proposal. She had barely stepped inside before he had pulled her against him, his mouth capturing hers in a kiss that left her dizzy. Or the time he had shown up outside her apartment unannounced, leaning casually against his car with an expression that told her he had run out of patience waiting for her to come to him. He had taken her hand without a word and driven her to a secluded restaurant on the waterfront, where they had shared a bottle of wine and talked until the candles burned low. It was intoxicating, but it was also dangerous. Because every time she let herself sink deeper into him, she felt the inevitable truth creeping closer: this couldn't last. Not in his world. Not in hers. She was too practical to believe in fairy tales, and Yale Prescott wasn't the kind of man who did forever. He built things, he conquered industries, he reshaped the world to his will. But love was messy. Love was unpredictable. And yet, despite everything, she couldn't stop herself from falling. One evening, as she stepped out of the office, she found Yale waiting beside his car, sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching her like he had been expecting her all along. She hesitated, glancing around. "You do realize people are starting to notice, right?" He didn't look concerned. "Let them." She sighed, but there was no real frustration behind it. She had long since learned that arguing with him was pointless when he had already made up his mind. "Get in," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "And if I have plans? Cancel them." She folded her arms. "That's a little presumptuous." Yale stepped closer, his voice lowering. "Tell me you don't want to and I'll let you go." She hated how easily he read her. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the car door and slid inside. The evening air was warm as they drove out of the city, the noise fading behind them. Piper watched the skyline disappear in the rearview mirror before turning to him. "Where are we going?" "You ask too many questions," he said mildly. "Still not a crime." He glanced at her briefly, something almost amused flickering in his gaze. You'll see. When they finally stopped, Piper stepped out of the car and realized they were at a private airstrip. A sleek jet sat on the tarmac, its engines humming softly under the golden glow of the setting sun. She turned to him, stunned. This is a bit excessive, don't you think? Yale didn't look remotely apologetic. I wanted to take you somewhere. She exhaled, shaking her head. You could have just picked a restaurant. I did. It's in Paris. Her brain stalled. I what? He motioned toward the plane. Come on. She should have protested. She should have reminded him that this was insane, that people didn't just whisk their not-quite-girlfriends off to Paris for dinner. But she didn't say a word. Because deep down, she knew this was exactly what it meant to be caught in Yale Prescott's orbit. And the truth was, she didn't want to escape it. Hours later, they were sitting at a quiet table on the terrace of a restaurant overlooking the Seine, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the distance. The city stretched around them, alive with music and laughter, but for once, Piper wasn't thinking about what came next. She was just here. With him. Yale poured her another glass of wine, his fingers trailing over the stem of his own glass as he studied her. You're thinking too much, he said. She sighed. It's a habit. Break it. Her lips twitched. Easy for you to say. He set his glass down and leaned forward, his voice quieter now. You're not just another part of my life, Piper. Her breath caught. I don't do things halfway. You know that. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. And what exactly are you saying? His gaze locked onto hers, steady and unwavering. I'm saying I don't want this to end. Piper had no words. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what scared her more, the idea of walking away from him. Or the idea that he might actually mean it. By the time they returned home, something between them had shifted. Piper had spent so much time convincing herself that this was temporary, that eventually Yale would move on, that she had never stopped to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't planning to. But reality had a way of creeping in when she least expected it. Because the moment they stepped off the jet, Yale's phone buzzed and she saw the way his expression hardened as he glanced at the screen. Work? She asked. He nodded. I have to handle something. She forced a smile. Go. I'll see you later. But as she walked away, a nagging feeling settled in her chest. Because as much as Yale had pulled her into his world, she still wasn't sure if there was a place for her in it. And sooner or later, she was going to have to find out. Piper had spent the last few weeks caught between two opposing forces, the magnetic pull of Yale Prescott and the reality of his world, a place where power dictated every move. She had known from the beginning that stepping into his orbit would change everything. What she hadn't anticipated was how deeply she would fall. And now she was beginning to wonder if she had made a mistake. The first sign of trouble came in the form of whispers around the office. At first, she ignored them, assuming they were just the usual gossip that followed a man like Yale. But then came the sidelong glances, the knowing looks from executives who barely acknowledged her before. And then there was the meeting. She had been reviewing a marketing proposal when the head of the board, Richard Calloway, requested a private word. She had expected a discussion about her latest campaign strategy. Instead, he had leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and given her a look that sent ice through her veins. You've done well here, Ms. Dawson, he had said. But we both know why you're really in this position. She had stiffened, her grip tightening on the folder in her hands. Excuse me. Richard had smiled, the kind of condescending expression that made her want to throw her coffee straight at him. You're talented, no doubt. But let's be honest, Yale doesn't bring people into his circle without a reason. And people are starting to talk. Her stomach had twisted. If you have something to say, Mr. Calloway, just say it. He had leaned forward. This company is built on reputation. If the board decides that your presence is becoming a distraction, there will be consequences. For you. And for him. She had walked out of that meeting with her heart pounding, her mind racing. By the time Yale returned from his business trip later that evening, she had made up her mind. This had to end. When he arrived at her apartment, she barely gave him time to step inside before she spoke. This isn't working. Yale froze, his coat still draped over his arm. What? She folded her arms, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Us. It's not sustainable. His expression darkened. Who got to you? She swallowed hard, but she didn't answer. His jaw tensed. Was it Calloway? She exhaled sharply. It doesn't matter. Yale took a step closer, his voice low. It matters to me. She shook her head. You have too much at stake. I won't be the reason your company suffers. His eyes burned into hers. You think I care about that more than you? She struggled to keep her composure. I think you don't realize how much you stand to lose. He was silent for a long moment, the tension between them thick enough to suffocate. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. I don't lose things that matter to me. Her throat tightened. Yale? No, his tone was firm. I won't let them control this. I won't let them dictate what I do, who I'm with. He exhaled sharply. But if you're telling me you don't want this, if this is truly your decision, then say it. She opened her mouth. But the words refused to come out. Because it wasn't her decision. Not really. She loved him. And that was the problem. Yale studied her face, searching for something, an answer, a sign, anything. And when she didn't give one, he exhaled, his expression shifting into something she had never seen before. Defeat. If you walk away, he said slowly, know that I won't stop you. Her heart ached. But she forced herself to turn away. And then she did the hardest thing she had ever done. She let him go. The days that followed were a blur. Piper buried herself in work, throwing every ounce of energy into her projects, pretending that the ache in her chest wasn't growing stronger with every passing hour. But nothing could fill the void Yale had left behind. She told herself she had done the right thing, that eventually the pain would fade. But when she walked into her office one morning and found a small, velvet box sitting on her desk, her entire world tilted. Her breath caught as she opened it. Inside, nestled against the dark fabric, was a delicate diamond bracelet. And beside it, a handwritten note. I don't believe in losing, but I believe in you. Her hands trembled. She had spent so much time convincing herself that she was protecting him, that walking away had been the only option. But Yale wasn't the kind of man who needed protection. He was the kind of man who fought for what he wanted. And he wanted her. She didn't give herself time to think. She grabbed the bracelet, clutched the note in her hand, and ran. When she burst into his office, Yale was standing by the window, his back to her. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Piper. She didn't hesitate. You were right. His brows furrowed. She inhaled unsteadily. I was scared. I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was protecting myself. Because I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to love someone who terrifies me. Yale's gaze softened. Terrifies you? She swallowed. Because you make me want things I never thought I could have. A long silence stretched between them. Then, finally, Yale crossed the room, stopping just inches from her. You already have them, he said. And then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. Piper's breath hitched. Yale held it between his fingers, his expression steady, unwavering. I was going to wait, but I've never been patient when it comes to you. Her vision blurred. Marry me, he said simply. No board matters. No expectations. Just us. A tear slipped down her cheek. Yes. The relief that washed over his face nearly shattered her. And when he pulled her into his arms, kissing her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered, she knew. She had finally found home. The wedding was everything she hadn't expected. Small, intimate, and impossibly perfect. Yale had whisked her away to a secluded villa overlooking the ocean, where they had exchanged vows beneath golden sunlight, the waves crashing in the distance. And as they danced under the stars that night, Piper rested her head against his chest, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat lull her into peace. You did it, she murmured. He pressed a kiss to her hair. Did what? Proved me wrong. His lips brushed against her temple. Get used to it. She laughed softly, and as Yale pulled her even closer, she knew. This was forever.